The impact of genetically modified foods. For the past 20 years, humans have been part of a worldwide experiment. The experiment includes the consumption of genetically modified organisms. Since the early 90s, GMOs have slowly and quietly entered our food supply without most of us even knowing. The average person now consumes nearly 193 pounds of genetically modified foods each year. Nearly 75% of our processed foods contain GMOs. Maybe the most disturbing part is that nearly 72% of the United States population has no idea that they are eating GM foods or that they even exist. Now, with the debate growing and the cries of the people being heard, as well as more peer-reviewed research, the impact of genetically modified foods on our society, our environment, and our health is beginning to be seen. So what are genetically modified organisms? They are organisms that have had their genetic makeup altered, usually by adding or modifying certain genes or traits. They include plants, simple-celled organisms, as well as animals. They are currently in the process of trying to approve of salmon that have been given human growth hormones that allow the fish to almost double in size in a short amount of time. The way this is done is usually by the gene being shot into the walls of the host organism by the means of a virus or bacteria that acts as a taxi, dropping off the new or altered DNA. Biotechnology usually consists of the gene being acquired from either the same species or a completely different species. In the 70s, at Ghent University in Belgium, a couple of biologists were studying a bacterium that altered plants' genetic codes by lending genes that eventually caused a tumor to form in the plant. The idea that a bacteria could swap genes with the plant led to what we know of genetically modified organisms today. Since their creation, GM foods and crops have become the fastest growing agricultural technology in history. Nearly 86% of corn, 90% of soybean, and over 93% of cotton grown in the United States now are grown from genetically modified seeds. An astonishing 395 million acres worldwide are of GM varieties, up from 4 million, a almost 9,000% increase. And it's some of the most common crops grown are corn, soybeans, canola, cottonseed, sugar beets, papaya, zucchini, and yellow squash. They often show up as ingredients in many processed foods with common names like corn syrup, soy lecithin, cottonseed oil, and they are sweeteners in soups, spreads, sauces, many more foods, and even infant formula. Genetically modified foods do have possible benefits to the world and humans. GM foods could reduce world hunger. They could combat infectious diseases, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health and child nutrition, as well as ensure a sustainable environment. With new technology, there is the possibility of vaccine-ready plants, plants that clean up the environment, plants resistant to pests and other insects, as well as drought-resistant plants. Most research on GMOs has been done by the biotech companies themselves. In 1992, the United States Food and Drug Administration approved of GM foods to enter the world in our food supply. The biotech companies and the FDA claimed that GM crops were no different than the crops the world had been used to. This statement alone has allowed many genetically modified foods to go on without further testing. The FDA does not do any testing on genetically modified foods and clearly states that it leaves the testing up to the biotech companies. They use what they call a voluntary consultation process to ensure their safety. Unfortunately, our own government has left the safety of the people and the world in the hands of multi-billion-dollar companies like Monsanto. Monsanto, a new $294 billion company, is responsible for almost 90% of the world's GM seeds. Monsanto, the creator of Agent Orange, a herbicide used for chemical warfare during Vietnam, has also been known to lie to the American people as well as the U.S. government. They were found to have lied about the risk of PCBs in the 70s after pollution was found. PCBs were used in the manufacturing of many things before 1977 and are known to cause cancer and other adverse side effects in humans. Now our government trusts them to supply us and the world with food. Monsanto created the first GM seeds in 1996 approved for agricultural use, called Roundup Ready soybeans. They require farmers to purchase the company-specific seed, company-specific herbicide, and sign contracts on their patent. When When Roundup Ready soybeans first appeared on the market, only 2% of the annual crops contained Monsanto seeds. By 2008, that number was past 90%. The now multi-billion-dollar company requires its customers to purchase new seed every year, adding to additional cost to an already expensive occupation. Monsanto has 75 devoted investigators for prosecuting farmers that keep their seed. Anyone caught saving Monsanto seeds, even neighboring farmers that do not use Monsanto seed, can be sued for patent infringement. This is something completely new to the agricultural business and something that could have an adverse effect worldwide, especially in developing nations. It is because of genetically modified foods that these corporations continue to grow larger and more powerful. Monsanto is well known for lying and creating some of the most potent chemicals on earth, yet the U.S. government continues to support Monsanto and allow them to feed the world. It is also worth mentioning that there is a high number of government officials who have been tied to biotech companies like Monsanto. As I talked about earlier, GMOs do have potential benefits. Unfortunately, GM crops today have only been designed for three things: insect resistance, herbicide resistance, and a prolonged shelf life. This is especially beneficial to the corporations that rely on farmers to buy their seeds and chemicals each year. The most common form of insecticide are Bt engineered crops. Bt is a popular organic pesticide that comes from a bacterium and can even be used by organic farmers. Its genetic makeup is genetically modified into most crops to give them their own natural Bt insecticide. However, with the growing number of GM crops, researchers are finding most common pesticides are evolving a resistance to Bt. This is troublesome for organic farmers who will be left with no organic pesticide, as well as the environment and our health, as crops will be sprayed with even more toxic insecticides. Herbicide-resistant crops are the largest sector of genetically modified organisms. One of the most common ingredients is glyphosate, and as more and more GM crops are being planted, the more the weeds are becoming resistant to this ingredient. This, like insecticides, will lead to the use of more highly toxic herbicides, which is already being reported. I spoke with a farmer the other day, and he informed me he uses Roundup Ready seeds. He stated that over the years he has had to use more and more herbicide to keep the weeds out of his fields, a true testimony to GM crops' effects on the environment. GM crops are living organisms, and their genetic pollution is unstoppable. It is not possible now to stop what we have started at this point. What this means for the environment is the plants as we once knew them will never be the same again. Some wildlife plants have already begun to show the same herbicide resistance as GM crops. This is also bad news for organic farmers who thrive on non-GMO crops and can only sell their crops when they have not been contaminated. Terra Prima, an organic farm, lost hundreds of thousands of dollars after discovering its organic corn was ruined by pollen from GM crops. One of the most understudied and most overlooked by biotech companies and the U.S. government is the risks of genetically modified foods on human health. One study of Roundup sold by Monsanto showed that its toxicity affected cell division in sea urchin eggs and provoked the first stages that led to cancer. GM crops also introduce new genes never consumed by humans before. As DNA is changed in the foods we eat, the health risks they could potentially cause in humans is unknown. Many scientists as well as consumers fear that new proteins being genetically modified into foods could cause allergenic properties. It is possible with GM foods that people who are allergic to one kind of food could find themselves allergic to many other foods due to gene transferring. In 1994, the FDA approved Monsanto's GM hormone that would allow cows to produce up to 25% more milk. It is commonly known as RBGH, or recombinant bovine growth hormone. Despite FDA vets' warnings that it caused mastitis and reproductive problems in cows, the government approved it as the first GM food for public consumption. Many studies from there on have now proven this potent hormone to cause breast, prostate, and colon cancer in humans. A more recent study out of Canada found insecticide in 93% of pregnant women's blood and 80% of umbilical cord blood. This study concluded that GM corn, a major component of Canadian and U.S. diets, was the cause. One of the highly underrated effects on human health that I noticed during research was how much GM crops have allowed for the overproduction of corn, thus leading to a high-calorie diet that we are so accustomed to today and a lower quality food. We now eat more corn than at any other time in history. It is in most foods we eat and it is fed to animals we eventually consume. Research has also shown that corn-fed diets on livestock has negative effects. Specifically in cattle, researchers found that their diet results in a more powerful acid-resistant E. coli. When the cattle were put back on their natural grass-fed diet, nearly 80% of the E. coli in their stomachs had disappeared. With genetically modified crops becoming a part of almost everything we consume on a daily basis, it is only fair for people to be informed. GM crops have not been proven safe, and they must be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. They should not be grouped with traditional crops that allow them to slip through the cracks untouched and unresearched. The U.S. government has let large corporations control what the people and ultimately the world eats without their opinion or a voice in the matter. If large biotech companies are going to fulfill their promises of a new and better world, they need to start creating the crops they have promised rather than the pesticide and herbicide strains they rely on for large revenue. The funding needs to go to peer-reviewed research and for independent, large-scale studies to be done on GM foods and their effects. Humans have been part of this potentially life-threatening experiment for far too long.